Dinkel. I'm the crop production agent here with the Midway Extension District that covers Ellsworth and Russell counties. So 2 county coverage. I am heavily involved with, though, on the state side on the co-chair for the crop PFT for K-State Research and Extension. And also help with other regional activities that go on in primarily the Northwest region. But just to kind of go over some basics on soil testing 101. I saw a deal posted, I think on Twitter or somewhere, social media. Sometimes it's always good just to review the basics of, a post regarding, I think, the Chiefs football games that go back to the fundamentals of football. So even professionals can do on a review on just some basics. So this is kind of just a drill on basics on soil testing, reasons why we kind of do that. If I can get my clicker to work. All right, just some reasons why we soil sample is to estimate probability of nutrient response, determining the amount of plant available nutrients such as nitrogen that's in the soil. Identify any trends that are going on, whether that be pH decreasing over time, phosphorus levels decreasing, and etc. Then estimate your long-term nutrient sufficiency, and then long-term average nutrient rates that you're applying. Then also diagnosing any problems that you might see. If you see a problem in an area in the field, pulling a soil sample can help you might determine what's going on in that area. Just some, probability of a fertilizer response is a big one, especially when we're talking about phosphorus. That one, you can, as the lower we go, you're going to see a bigger probability of response with applying fertilizer. So, and knowing what the crops, what those levels are too, there's a big difference in whether it's wheat or corn, where that level will be. So that's always something you might take a look at if you're in a corn, wheat, sorghum rotation. Corn and sorghum might have a little bit more similar levels where they're going to respond, but wheat's going to be totally different. So you kind of want to keep that in mind with your fertility plans. Some limitations, there can be some variability in test results from year to year. And then time and work to pull the soil samples is a big one. It does take a little bit of time. I worked as a consultant for about 7 years out of college. It does take some time to go and do that, but so if you're a farmer and doing it yourself, that's something that could be a factor for you. Then time to get the results back from the lab. I know K-State and other labs, they're pretty efficient anymore. Usually it's about a week to 14 days by the time you send them off and they get them to get results back. And then determining what tests you'll be needing. Just some basic tools that you'll need. Good old standard soil probe. I've always liked the Oakfield probe myself. This one would have a limitation though. This is only a 10-inch bucket. If you're doing a subsoil sample, I would need to get the 20-inch bucket for it to do a sub sample, but this is really good for like a surface 0 to 6 and has the mark where you have the 6-inch mark. And WD-40 is always a must to get the soil in and out better. And then a good just general plastic bucket to dump your pores in, and then your sample bags. And I have all these at our offices at Ellsworth and Russell. You can check out probes from us if you need to. And then we have the bags if you need to collect any samples, and then we send them off to the K-State lab. Now, what are some keys to proper soil sampling? One that's very crucial is trying to get a good consistent depth of the sample. And then two, number of cores that you're pulling per sample, and then proper handling of those collected samples after you have pulled them and put them in the soil sample bag. And always any attention to details when you're collecting the sample. Just some considerations, for 0 to 6 inch depths, you're typically gonna be testing for your pH, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, iron, and boron. For your mobile nutrients, nitrates, chloride, and sulfur, that's gonna be your subsoil sample, which is a 0 to 24 inch depth, core. Typically, you're gonna do that all at once, like I mentioned. This probe wouldn't do it without pulling one core and then trying to go back in the same hole, which causes other issues with it possibly collapsing in or other contaminants going in. So it's always better to have one continuous 0 to 20 or 24 core when you're doing a subsample like that. Okay, where in the field? There's many different methods. You can do just a simple random collection across the field, which is good if you have a field that's pretty similar in topography and soil types. Systematic, you're gonna kind of follow different patterns in the field. You might be sampling the low area versus your hillsides versus your top areas, or by different management zones is another way to break them down, or just doing a composite of just random areas in the field, no matter what the topography or that might be, and just mixing everything together. Now, when sampling can take any time of the year, but there is some considerations that you might want to take into factor. Like for wheat, you're typically going to be pulling those more late summer time frame, prior to planting wheat or any fertilizer applications. For corn, sorghum, and soybeans, you might be looking at like a late fall or early winter, and even into late winter, early spring time frame before you start fertilizing. And if you have put any fertilizer and wanted to pull anything after that, you're gonna be waiting a minimum of about 30 days after that to do any of those fertilizer sampling. I kind of jumped ahead a little bit there, but that's kind of what I covered for corn, sorghum. This says late winter, early spring. I always say more, you see, when I was consulting, I was always doing it more fall to early winter. Would you say that's still okay, Lucas?
Yeah, I think the key thing there is, if you find yourself into a lake situation, like, probably the best example would be like sorghum. Just keep in mind that if we end up, say we're in the, mid part of May and thinking about putting some ground back to sorghum, we'll go out and sample it right quick. Built into our recommendations, we've got some mineralization built into there. Well, as we move, if we're sampling by the latter part of May, first part of June, some of that mineralization has already happened. And so we probably want to discount, that piece of the credit a little bit, but, that's really the only real trade-off to think about there.
Yep. Then here, like I mentioned, number of cores is, per sample is very crucial to keep track of. Dorvar's done a lot of research on it. There's a lot of studies on it that at 15 to 20 cores per sample is kind of that sweet spot. Now, not all that's going to fit in this bag, but you pull 15 cores, get them mixed up in your bucket good, just dump it in, weight can and discard the rest. And like I said, the lower number of cores you pull, that does introduce a lot of variability in results you could see, because you can see high phos levels one time or extremely low the next. So that's where that 15 to 20 sample cores per sample comes in. Then I always kind of get this, number of acres per sample. That can kind of vary, just depends on your field size, but and what you're doing, but typically looking at anywhere to 5 to 20, all the way up to up to 50. Sometimes it depends on your situation. Acres per sample. Now, how often? Typically looking about every 2 to 4 years. Some guys, like Miles Consulting, we'd be pulling pretty much every year. And that might be good if you need to really develop a history on those fields, pulling every year just to kind of see where you're at, and then maybe backing off to every 2 years, especially if you're monitoring your phos and pH levels. And that kind of shows a good graph of how your soil test phosphorus can change over time. Blue lines without any phosphorus applied, and then reds was just a standard 30 pounds. Say they're kind of flat there, and then started dipping off. So whether that was just a factor of raising better crops or what, I'm not sure. That's a big part. So even with applying fertilizer, if you're not applying enough and raising good crops and taking off more than what you're putting on, you should still be mining your phos levels. And how to prepare the samples. Like I said, ideally you're gonna be putting them in the correct bags, like what I have at the extension office. They typically shouldn't be dried, but kept in like a room temperature setting if you're not able to get them sent off right away, or even in the freezer, right? Could be an option. Definitely do not apply any heat or leave them in a pickup. That wildly skews a lot of data, especially when it comes to nitrogen. If you're trying to see what your nitrogen levels are, then always try to protect from any contamination. That's where just a standard plastic bucket is typically the best to use. Don't use any galvanized, that can skew your zinc levels if you use a galvanized. So just stick to kind of like a plastic bucket that can be cleaned out decently. And just some useful tests that we typically see ran, of course, a profile nitrate, Bray 1 for phos. Olson is typically used more for higher pH soils. We wouldn't typically see it too much needed in this region. Maybe there's some spots, maybe in Russell County, but typically the Melic 3 covers us, and that's what runs.
About 7.4 pH is
Yeah.
where a person typically transition from the -3 to the old 6.
Like I said, soil pH and anymore, we're starting to see lower pH can be more of a concern in this part of the world. So lime requirements and organic matter. This is just an example of what our sample check-in sheets are and what K-State packages we have available. As you can see, we can pretty much run just about any test that you might need for your farm, all the way from just a pH, phos, K package, all the way to complete diagnostic. And then of course, mobile nutrients there.
One thing, I don't know if Dora was online yet, but if, one thing I would say is if you guys are interested in doing some grid sampling, they do have some grid sample pricing, so. Pricing that's on there is on a per sample basis, but if you want to do some grid work, they'll work with you on the price of that. So,
And this is how, K-State, they do their reporting. This was on a field I kind of helped manage and help the Russell FFA out there. This was from 2022 before we're getting ready for this. The 2023 growing season with sorghum. Just kind of, we did a 90 bushel yield goal, which we darn near met that, even though I said kind of went kind of conservative on it and was planning on 70 bushel. But got your pH, organic matter here as a percentage, potassium and phos are going to be on a parts per million, and zinc, and it'll kick out the recommendation there, and that's all been updated to the current soil guide and fertilizer interpretations. And just you guys all have this out, other than it's not in color. Norvar, Lucas, and a bunch of others have worked very hard on getting the soil test interpretations and fertilizer X up to date, and a lot of different changes, and Lucas will be going over that here in a little bit. Just some summary, of course, when you're pulling soil samples, they need to be representative of the field, and then any recommendations base should be utilized through the interpretation guide and recommendation guide. And then always take more forwards than what you might need. It's a key, 15 to 20 at least. And then especially this year, following a drought year, profile nitrogen can be a pretty decent credit that you can factor in for this coming year. So something to always look into, just always knowing what's there, and might save you 30 or 40 pounds of nitrogen that you might not need to apply. Okay, and then of course yield goal is always a key factor when developing fertilizer recommendations. Always be realistic. I wish we could be Iowa and always count on record crops, but we either have boom or bust around here, it seems like. So using your averages, crop yield averages, you guys know definitely how your field yield, and tailoring your fertilizer per each field. Great. Is there any questions on that?